Good morning, everybody. Larry, Fort Worth Memories Museum and Group, and Hometown Heroes. And Rick and Mary, y'all have a special guest, and y'all got the show.
We do indeed, Larry. Thank you for having us today. This is our 15th episode of Hometown Heroes. So
we're big time
now. We're big time. And we've got a big time guest today.
Yes.
We're so honored to have David Huntley. He's an international businessman. He's a survivor of the Blitz in London. He's a best-selling author. He's a speaker that goes around telling about his experiences and his late wife's experience. So, David, we're so honored to have you. And he does have an accent. He's from east of Fort Worth, so he does have a little accent, like way east. So, David, welcome to Hometown Heroes.
Well, thanks, Rick, and do appreciate me being here. I'm very honored, very humbled about it, and thanks very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And talking about accents, by the way, I mean, we're all the same people divided by the same language, as they say. And but I am actually quite fluent in Texan, because I can say y'all.
Y'all.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's all that matters, right?
That's all that matters,
That's it.
right?
Yeah.
So thanks, Mary, for inviting me.
Oh,
I
we're
do
so
appreciate
glad you're here. You have
It's an honor.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you bring a lot of light and a lot of stories
You
and a lot
do.
of history.
A lot of stories in history. How old were you whenever you first remember?
When I first remember, I remember way back when I was 2.5 years old.
Okay.
But from the standpoint of the war, I remember the war exactly. From 1940 through 45, I was right there in the Blitz during the war. When it started, I was evacuated for about 3 weeks. My father had been, would you like to put picture number 1 up and see my father there? My father had been called up. Well, he was in both World Wars, and he was in World War I, and then he was called up for the Second World War, and he was wounded and evacuated at Dunkirk. And he did allow me to be evacuated, but I protested most vehemently as a young child. I was about 6 years old at the time, and I didn't like it where I was staying, and I was performing or making a big fuss. And my father, he missed me because he'd been away at war, and he came and fetched me after 3 weeks. And I always remember, because I was on his shoulders at a bus stop, and he was telling me he's got a puppy at home for me and donuts and so on. And that was the first time I remembered about the war starting, because as we got home, so one of the raids started. And we lived in London in a suburb called Clapham, and it was near Clapham Common. And Clapham Common has all the ack-ack guns and barrage balloons. And when the raids came, not only were you hearing the bombing, but you could also hear the ack-ack guns going off. So the noise, probably as a lasting memory, the war, it's the noise that probably I remember more than anything else. It was quite incredible. And yeah, so Clapham Common, if you want to see the ack-ack guns, you can see them on photograph number 6.
Those are like anti-aircraft
guns. And we had barrage balloons going up with cables which would trap German planes and blah, blah, blah.
And this was all mostly done at night, and then they started doing it during the day?
During the day, of course, it was much later when we got the V1s and V2s, and I can talk about that later. But we had a coal cellar in our house, and if you want to see the house, it's picture number 5, and that house is still there today. And funny enough, well, before I talk about who owns it today, the house it's a very big house, and it had a coal cellar where we would keep the coal to put on the fire. And we used to go to the coal cellar when the raids came, so we didn't have to go to an underground shelter like some people and so on. But we also had what's known as a Morrison shelter, And the Morrison shelter is picture number 10. Most Americans have never seen one of these. And it is a big steel slab on top. Is a table where we would eat off of that and sleep underneath. And that house, that shelter, if a house was hit and it collapsed, it would hold all the debris and prevent you from being crushed, because we would sleep underneath that. But if you look at the picture, there it is there. And you can see people having tea. You always stop for tea, right?
Yeah,
And
no
you
matter
would-
what,
you
you have
would
to stop for
sleep
tea.
under that.
You sleep under there. But this would be for a limited number of people, obviously. Mostly us kids would sleep under there. I remember learning the poem, The Owl and the Pussycat, and my sister saying, "Say it again, David, say it again." And the bombs were falling and the building was shaking.
But that gave her comfort.
Yeah,
didn't it?
yeah. Please say it again. The Owl and the Pussycat.
And you talk about the noise and the building shaking. I mean, that was.
A house across the street one night. This will give you a perspective of what it's like as a child in terms of war. I mean, just think of Ukraine today, right? The house across the street got demolished. And what upset me more than anything else was, although I'd seen the bodies, 2 people taken out, and I knew those people, what upset me was the dog was killed. I used to play with the dog. So that as a child, that affected me more than, the people. It's odd. And of course, as a child, everything's a game. And we would pick up shrapnel. We'd always have a collection of shrapnel. And you were told it's dangerous, because if it's an incendiary bomb, then it's phosphorus and it's dangerous.
You're still alive after
yeah.
picking all that stuff up.
Yeah, listen to me. You know that house that you showed the house right earlier? In the cellar, us boys used to make toy soldiers out of lead. We had a blowtorch. We would melt lead and we would pour it into these molds. I would paint the soldiers. Now, here's a funny thing. Just about 3 or 4 years ago, I was on a Facebook page called Clapham, which is to do with that neighborhood. And someone said, which house did you live in, or what house are you living in Clapham? And I put 20 Edgeley Road. Some woman responded to my comment and said, I own that house. So I made contact with this woman. Her name is Francine Rocha. And it's quite remarkable, because her family had bought the house in 1945 after we left. And she eventually inherited the house. And she turned it into 2 apartments, and she lives somewhere else, but she now owns this place. And she rents it to some wealthy millennials. And I got in very friendly with her. And eventually last year, I went over to inaugurate a commemorative marker that I had established for an American bomber that crashed. And in fact, she drove me to the site. And she took me to the house, and she took me all over so I could have a nostalgic look at all the different places and so on. And later, we were having dinner at her house in Surrey somewhere. And we had this big table with all the family of hers there. And she said to her brother, because I told her about the toy soldiers that I had made. And she talked to her brother and said, Bernard, didn't you find some soldiers in the cellar? And he said, yeah, I used to play with them. So the stuff that I made 70 years later or whatever, he had been playing with some of he'd found in a corner in the dark, and she remembers him, or he remembers placing them on a shelf somewhere, standing them up. Yeah, so it's sort of serendipity, as it were, that we should have these connections. And there were many other connections what I could talk about, but I'd bore you to death with that. But anyway, I used to walk to school with my Mickey Mouse gas mask, which we didn't have to use, but we had to practice with it.
Mhm.
And in fact, it was so ugly, if you put it on, you would scare every cat in the neighborhood. But walking to school in the morning and then coming home at night, when you turned the corner, you just hope your house was still there every single day. I would go to school with my lunch. What's my lunch? It was a piece of bread, thick piece of bread, with the scrapings of fat from the previous roast, which you put on the bread, and the pepper and salt, wrap it in newspaper and put it in your pocket and go to school. There's none of this backpack stuff and plastic boxes and treats and stuff like that. No, it was plain bread with fat, and that's what we had for lunch. It's a lot of memories. We used to make scooters out of old bits of wood that we would scrape. We weren't allowed to go in the bombed out houses, but of course, boys are boys. That's what we did.
That's what, of course,
Right.
whatever you're
And
not supposed to do.
It was exploring and so on. And we pick up bits of wood and we would make scooters. There was a factory just down the road from us in Clapham, and they had bull races. You know what a bull race is, right? It's a raised steel wheel with ball bearings inside, so that you could make a wheel out of it.
Sure.
So we had a wheel, and of course the noise it would make on the street would be unbelievable.
Metal on the street.
Yeah, metal on the street, and it was made out of rough wood and so on. So yeah, it's interesting. What else do you want to know?
During this period of time, your dad, was he in and out?
Well, at
and,
night, no.
was
He
he-
was wounded at Dunkirk and came home, and he was invalided out.
So he was at
So
Dunkirk?
he was at he was at Dunkirk, yeah. And in fact, we didn't see him for 3 months after Dunkirk because he'd been injured in his head and had lost his memory. And so we thought he was dead. And but he came home and he got remarried, and I had a stepmother. Anyway, that's another whole story. But he stood outside our house in Clapham as a fire warden, and every time there was a raid, he had to report the incendiary bombs that were falling and so on. I'll tell you, if you want to see what the bombs were like in London, let me give you a picture number 3. If you put that up.
So he was like one of the wardens that would stand out at
Outside the
night.
house and report in whatever bombs were falling at the time, and have to, make notes or whatever he had to. And here's a funny incident. Next door to us were 2 old spinsters, and one night, they had their blackout curtains open, and they were flicking the light on and off. Oh God! This was the most dangerous thing ever, because they're just giving their old Jerry's a beautiful target. And so my father and my older stepbrother broke down their front door, went in the house and pulled all the fuses out, and reported them to the police, and the police did nothing because they were old spinsters, a bit cuckoo. So they didn't do anything with them. But my father broke down the door and pulled the fuse. Okay, these are the bombs that fell on London. That is the whole of London there. I don't know if there's another one. If you go to number 4.
That's a lot of bombs.
Are you kidding? Yeah.
A lot of people were. How many people were killed?
Yeah,
what's
43,000 of my fellow Londoners lost their lives during the bombing of London. 43,000. Think of that.
You probably lost some friends, lost some relatives.
I lost a couple of school friends. In fact, I wrote a little fictionalized little skit about a conversation I had with my fellow schoolboys at school about one of our pals who died because we heard from some other kid that their house had got hit. Anyway, I could read that to you if I have it here. It's because someone said to me once, "Oh, so you in the Blitz?" So, of course, you know, you weren't in combat, as it were. I said, "Excuse me." I said, "No, we
You
weren't.
were at ground zero for combat.
We weren't in combat. We had nothing to shoot back with."
Yeah.
So I don't have this thing with me. I don't think.
Now, what was this second picture?
Okay, this is an arrow pointing to my house, and all around you see where the bombs fell around our house.
So they came
Wow,
right in your
they were right
neighborhood.
there.
Yeah, oh yeah, a lot. And there are different types of bombs. There's high explosives, and then there are incendiary. And these are mostly incendiaries, but there's another picture. I didn't bring it with me, but there's other pictures where I can show you the incendiary bombs.
A lot of fire, a lot of destruction.
Are you kidding? Talk about stopping for tea. Look at this lady.
Yeah.
I don't think I even have that on here.
Sitting on the rubble drinking tea.
Drinking tea. Yeah.
Because, you know,
Yeah.
you've got to stop for tea.
A spot of tea. Do you
Yeah.
still have a spot of tea every day?
Oh, every day, of
Every
course.
day.
And I might tell you it's Yorkshire Gold. I want to tell you something about a V1. I don't know if I got a picture of it here. Yeah, I got if you put the V1 up, it's picture number 8. This is a remarkable picture, this one. I didn't actually have it there.
Were these pictures that you got from some kind of archives? Or?
Yeah, different archive I
Okay.
kept over the years. This is two ladies getting off a bus. And the reason that she is glancing to the left is because there's a huge explosion down the street about a quarter of a mile. And it's a V1 that just landed and exploded down there. But anyway, that's another story.
This is the V1 here.
Yeah, here's the V1. Now, let me tell you about the V1. You hear a lot of stories about planes being sent up and tipping the V1s and making them crash. That did happen, but it's not a regular thing that happened because it's exceedingly dangerous for the plane to do that. And often they themselves would fly out of control because it would flip their own plane. But what they would do is send up a Hawker Tempest. A Hawker Tempest flew a little faster than a Spitfire. This could keep up with a V1 at 350 odd miles an hour, and it would get within 6 inches of that wing. It would disrupt the airflow under that wing, and that would be enough for the V1 to tilt slightly, which would upset the gyroscopic control inside the V1 and cause it to crash.
So the V1 was like a drone, kind of.
It was, and it was guided by a like a gimbal thing with the gyroscopic control. And these things were very primitive, and they used to sound like a tractor coming over. It would go boom, 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 like this. And when it stopped, you ducked because you knew it was coming down. Okay, now put up number 9, and I'll show you something completely different. And incidentally, if a plane shoots at this, it was also exceedingly dangerous for the plane because it would explode. It's a massive explosion. And so it would be dangerous for any following plane to shoot it down. If you put number 9 up.
How many pilots do you think that the British lost?
Yeah, that's a good question. I
Did
did know that, and I don't have the number for you right now.
Because the United States
Well,
lost.
you lost,
we
80-something thousand, I
That
think.
was a very dangerous
Oh, well,
occupation.
there's my book coming out, hopefully in the not too distant future, The Tomahawk Warrior. And I talk about the B-17 a lot. Anyway, this is the V2. And the V2, this is what happens. They go 55 miles into the stratosphere. They go 150 miles toward London. When they shut off the engine, that's 55 miles up. When it comes down, it's coming at such a supersonic speed, you don't hear it, you don't see it, nothing. All you get is an explosion. And it's a massive explosion, big crater. It is very fortunate for us that the Germans did not have the atmospheric fuses at that time, which would have caused the V2 to explode above ground. Luckily, it went in the ground and exploded. If it had been above ground, the devastation would have been even greater. The last but one, I've got a picture of it, but the last but one V2 that came down was in Mill Hall in London, and it killed 134 people. If this had come out 18 months, 2 years earlier, I'd be here I wouldn't even be here. I'd be speaking German. The war would have been over. No question about it. The war would have been over. England would never have survived if this had come out at about 18 months, 2 years earlier.
Now, as a child going through all this, there has to be a lot of fear and concern about.
Well, certainly, certainly there's fear, but you
just get used to it?
You learn to live with it.
Part of life.
Basically that's what it is. It's something you know, and you
because it wasn't like once a month; it was every day.
More or less every day. There was a
night.
lull, of course, after the Blitz. There was a lull to a certain extent, but then there became some daylight bombing, and then, of course, came the V1s, and these were pretty devastating because they caused a lot of damage. And it was towards the end of the war, on 1944, July 1944, when my father sent us 3 boys out of London to stay in an aunt's cottage. But that's when I nearly got killed by a B-17 bomber. So,
not in London, but
outside.
Out in
Yeah,
country.
that's another story. But I remember being I tell you what, I was terrified one day. Coming home from school, it was probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock, somewhere around there. And I was on the street. There was nobody else on the street. I was walking home, and suddenly it got dark. It just got dark, and I couldn't understand it. And everything just went black, and it was terrifying for me as a kid. I just could not understand why it suddenly went black. So it's not that late. I'm not late coming home, blah, blah, blah. But it was many years later when I began investigating. And there's a meteorological office in London where you can go. And I've now got a picture of it. I've got an illustration where you can actually click on this animation, and it will show you a full eclipse takes place
There's a solar
at
eclipse.
that day on the 10th of September, 1942.
Wow.
I told my sister-in-law, I told her, I said, Leslie, and about stories, and I told her about this story. She said that's the day she was born.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that when you talk about it, and we saw the picture that the audience didn't see of the woman sitting on the scrap pile and drinking
right.
tea, but
Yeah.
of people going to school. So continuing to try to live some kind of normal life
Absolutely.
at a time when nothing else was normal. I would
Yeah.
think that was kind of the way to keep the kids
Motive,
feeling it.
Yeah. And the other thing is on the radio, there was a radio show called ITMAR. ITMAR is the acronym for It's That Man Again, which is talking about Hitler. And it was a comedy show, right? And it was the comedian was Tommy Handley, and Tommy Handley, he had a gang of other comedians with him, and they used to do these skits on the radio every Thursday or whatever it was. Us schoolboys, we used to take some snippets of whatever these things were going on and whatever the sayings were. And of course, we'd go to school and we would spout these jokes and whatever at that time. So there was some hilarity as well as drama and frightening things, of course, yeah. But again, I think adults probably were more scared than kids.
Because you guys had more of a sense of normalcy. With
Sense
going
of
to school
normalcy
and doing things
and,
at the same time, playing with your friends.
Yeah, and a lot more interesting things. You'd walk on Clapham Common and you'd see the ack guns. It was all really interesting stuff. You see barrage balloon. I remember a barrage balloon being brought down and deflated, and there was one guy who got trapped underneath, and they had to pull him out because this thing was falling and collapsing on him. Little things like that you remember. Yeah.
And your family had a radio, and you'd listen to the radio together?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so you actually got to hear Winston Churchill.
Oh, wow,
many
yeah.
times.
I was in Trafalgar Square when he broadcast a speech over the air that came over loudspeakers, and I remember being put on my brother's shoulders to be able to see if there's. Well, I don't think I just don't remember him actually being in the square, but he was making a speech which crowds of people in Trafalgar Square listening to. Yeah, Churchill is my hero. I've got all his books. This
he was
man,
a brilliant man, wasn't he?
absolutely.
He was at the right man,
Yeah.
at the right place at the right time. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, he lost the power of England in terms of those relationship with the United States, because at Yalta, he was overruled by Truman. Not so much overruled, but ignored. Truman ignored his advice about what they should do with Stalin. And Truman felt that he could handle Stalin, and he couldn't. And he didn't.
But Churchill wanted
Because
to go
if it
ahead
wasn't,
and keep moving.
if they'd listened to Churchill, we would not have what we've got today. I'm telling you, they would not have it. They needed to stop Stalin right there and then, and they didn't do it. And
Yeah, all that history is just so amazing to me, because Europe was at war. The United States was kind of isolationist, and we were supporting, but we weren't there.
yeah, that's
We
true.
got drug into the war.
Yeah, you sort of got dragged in because Churchill kept his persuasion to Roosevelt ongoing all the time. But Roosevelt was having a difficult time as well, because he didn't have the population behind him at all. Yeah. But eventually, of course, when Japan hit, then that was a change of scenery. Yeah, you guys came over to us guys a bit late, but you made it. Thanks very much. Because we'd had about a year or so. We'd had a year or more before you guys came over.
Your late wife, she was under
Nazi occupation in France.
Okay.
Yeah, if you put up a picture, I'll tell you what, put up a picture number 12. That's this would give an illustration of how when the invasion started in France in the vernacular, when that started, millions of French people had to flee on the road. And she was part of that with her family, and they had to be on the road for 3-4 weeks, in which they foraged for food on abandoned farms and killed chickens that they could catch. This is a picture that you see here of a typical fleeing French people on the road. And then the next picture, if you look at number 13, This is what Sophie actually experienced, was Stuka dive bombers diving on the fleeing people and firing at them with Stuka dive bombers.
At the civilians.
At the civilians. And don't forget, the Stuka dive bomber, the noise that it makes, that particular noise is a special device that was put on that machine to terrify civilians. That's it. That's what it was
for. You
for.
heard that too.
No, I never heard the
It didn't
Stuka.
come over to
No.
England.
No, they were mainly these
Bombers.
two bombers, these twin bombers, and then the fighters up in the air, which I used to watch the contrails of Spitfires. But those Stuka dive bombers, she had to dive into ditches on the side of the road, and this is an example of diving into the ditch. And
Was that your ex-wife there? Or your
no, that is
Your
that's a Belgian group fleeing from in Belgium, but this is a picture which is typical of what happened. And then after about 3 or 4 weeks of being on the road, the Germans, because they said, we're now occupying your country, you can go back home. And so the family turned around and went back home. If you put up the next one, it's
She was about as old as you were.
she was actually 5 years older than me.
Okay.
4 years older than me. So she was well done. If you look at picture number 11, this is a picture taken of Sophie at school just before the invasion began. And no, that's not number 11. That's number 14. Okay, now if you look at number 11, okay, that is Sophie there in front of her school just before the local Germans, Gestapo, whoever they were, took over her school building for their use, and she had to move to the boys' school. But you can see I picked out the best girl in the class, right?
Yeah, you did.
I did. Yeah, of course.
We would expect no less.
We were married 62 years. So,
Wow.
I mean,
With
not
the
gallivanting around.
with the French,
Yeah.
then you have the people that sided with the Germans, and then you had, because there were some French that worked with the Germans, weren't there? And then you had the French underground and the people that were fighting behind the scenes.
There were not many who were working with, you mean collaborators?
Collaborate. Yes.
There was some unfortunate collaboration on the part of some women.
Yeah.
Who, and don't forget, there's a lot of people, there were a lot of people starving in France. Fortunately, my late wife's parents, they had a sort of a little small holding. They had a cow and things of this kind. But a lot of people were not getting, especially in the city like Paris, they never had enough money. They never had enough to eat. And so there was some collaboration in terms of, wanting to get food and that kind of thing. But this, do you remember the film The Longest Day?
Oh, yeah.
Put number 17 up.
We just talked about that last week, The Longest Day with Chuck Hodge, because that was one of the films he said was instrumental in him really getting this
The bug.
passion
Yeah.
that he had for.
I'll tell you a story about The Longest Day, which will surprise you. If you got it up there, okay.
Yeah, there's a little delay in what we're seeing here.
I understand. I understand. Then, okay, you see that lady there? She's the star of that movie.
Sophie Loren.
No, that's Arena Demick.
Okay.
Arena Demick and my wife grew up together in the same
they really?
village.
Wow.
And if you
I
put,
remember her. She was the one that was on the bicycle.
yeah.
Yeah.
And she was in lots and lots of movies after
Yeah.
that with Ingrid Bergman, a whole bunch of movies. And she came to stay with us in my house in Allen, Texas in 2003. And there's a picture of her and Sophie on number, hang on. Well, put up number 18. That's Arena herself there.
So they remained friends the rest of their life.
Yeah, and I got a picture of the two of them together at my house where they're reminiscing together. That's. But first of all, 18, you see a beautiful picture of Arena.
And how did y'all meet?
That's a good question. There's Sophie and Arena together, reminiscing about old days.
Both children that grew up in the village?
They grew up together in the same village, yeah. And she became world famous. She used to be the favorite of Johnny Carson.
Is that right?
Yeah, because she used to come on and she was very entertaining about all the films that are being made, and she would describe the next films that are coming and so on and so on. And Johnny Carson used to love having her on. I was going to show you a 14. If you look at number 14, this going back a little bit, Sophie's brother, Jean, he was picked up by the Germans and sent to work in Germany under forced labor. And he was there for working in the factories in Germany for the duration of the war. Yeah.
So you don't think about the German. I mean, you think all the war machine was operated by the Germans, but it was operated by the countries that they took over.
Yeah.
This is her brother.
That's her brother. Yeah. I met him in 1956. We had lunch together. Tragically, he died in Paris in a terrible accident in that year, 1956. Well, yeah, I'm not going to make any accusations here, but I'm going to give you an idea of the kinds of things that happened in France after the war. The people who went to work in Germany under forced labor, in the beginning, it was a kind of, it wasn't exactly voluntary, but it was the Vichy government who implemented this law to help the Germans by sending able-bodied men to work in Germany, and they could come back on holiday and this kind of thing. And of course, when they came back, they never went back. And they fled into the bush and became the Maquis. However, some people were then forced and picked up and sent by train, whether you liked it or not, and sent to work in Germany. So there were two kinds of workers. There were those who did go initially, and there was others who were forced. But no matter, after the war, there was a lot of discrimination against these people. In fact, I have found it almost impossible to talk to anyone in France to get ideas of what's happening or what happened to the inductees, or whatever you like to call them. And there were accusations of collaboration and so on. When we met Jean in Paris, and we had lunch together and so on, he was quite sad. And he didn't say directly, but I got the impression that he was being a little bit persecuted in some way. And he was having difficulty in getting his old job back where he used to work for Citroën, the car manufacturer in Paris. And he was not able to get his job back. And he finished up working on a construction on one of these big, tall cranes, these telescopic cranes. And that thing, he was working on it by himself when it collapsed and it crushed him and killed him. Now, we wanted to investigate, and we could not get anything out of the company. Why was only one man there instead of two men? Why? There's a lot of questions. We even went to the police, and we had a meeting with the police captain. I couldn't speak very good French at that time. I still don't speak good French. I speak, we have an expression, je parle français comme le vache espagnol. You speak French like a Spanish cow. But I couldn't even speak like a Russian cow in those days. And so this was a very one-sided conversation. There was my wife and her sister, and they were asking these questions of the captain. Eventually he got up and he opened the door, escorted us out. He says, "You don't ask any more questions. This case is closed. We don't want to hear you anymore. You get out." And that was it. So there was obviously something not right. There was some payback or whatever it was, thinking that he had been a collaborator. That's what I'm saying.
Even years later.
Yeah. This is 1956, 10 years later. I mean, he should have been working back at his old job, but he wasn't.
So those people, like that movie Schindler's List, there was people in businesses that tried to help the workers that were. That was a true story. I didn't know that.
Oh, it was. Yeah. In fact, there are a number of stories just like it.
At his peril, that Schindler could have been, you know, he played the part, and I don't know, he didn't really rescue, but maybe 100, but that's 100 more that would not have lived.
Absolutely, yeah. And he is revered by the Israelis for hero of something or other. There's a name they give to these people.
So there really were a lot of people over there, like the commandant of the camp where they executed the 50 British airmen. He was so appalled by it, he let the other detainees build a memorial because he knew, you know, the guy that was in charge said, "How many of our pilots were wounded?" And he said, "None. They were all shot." Hitler wanted to shoot them all. And one of his propaganda ministers said, "We're going to pay for this," and they did pay for it. You know, some of those guys got executed. The other ones all spent time in the penitentiary. So
you've written a book, and you've got more coming, or how many books have you written?
I've written one, and that's a historical, and it's chasing a Nazi who disappeared at the end of the war. He was Hans Kammler, and he, what made me want to write about him is that he was never tried in absentia or even indicted in absentia. He disappeared. And yet he was an architect of the death camps. He sealed the Warsaw Ghetto, and he was put in charge like a production manager or project manager of all the super weapons, the V1s, V2s, and he used thousands and thousands of slave labor, Polish and Czechoslovakian and Jewish slave labor. And in fact, the Jewish War Veterans Group given me a certificate of appreciation for what I'd written about the plight of the Jews in war under this guy. And the Polish ambassador to the United States wrote me a handwritten note thanking me for what I'd written about the plight of the Polish people in World War II.
What was the guy's name again?
Hans Kammler.
How do you spell that last name?
Kammler.
And where can we get a copy of your book? Is it on Amazon or?
Well, you can go to my website.
Okay.
You've got my card, I believe. You go to my website, and you get a free free delivery and a signed copy.
I'm going to let you. The youngest eyes here.
Yeah, the youngest eyes
with some glasses.
Well, I gotta have glasses too.
Yeah, what's your website? David could
it's
tell
on
us.
there. It's on there. Deathwatchbeetle.net. Right. In fact, I gave you a link to my bio, which is the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you look at the book,
Yeah, we'll put that link
yeah,
in the description.
Yep.
I'll take a picture of
So
it.
all one word, deathwatchbeetle.net.
yeah. And if you go to my website, there are stories of World War II that I've talked to these guys, and I put their stories up there. There's a lot of information up there, and there's stuff about Sophie and French resistance and all kinds of things. There's one guy, for example, Ali Blood. Ali Blood was a P-47 pilot and part of a squadron, and he was shot down in Normandy, and he was picked up by the Maquis, and he fought with the Maquis. Then he was captured by the Germans, and then he escaped, and then he fought with the Maquis again, and he was caught by the Germans again, and he escaped again. This time he made it back to the American lines, and they shipped him home, and Ali Blood was instructed to form a school in America on how to escape from the Germans.
That's pretty good. But David, you've brought up that you have received letters and commendations and things from other countries in relation to your work. But recently you were even recognized by the local Daughters of the American Revolution here in Texas.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about that, because that was a really great accolade.
Yeah, I was really stunned, actually, really humbled to get that. It was the Americanism Medal. And there are two medals that they give each year. One is to an American citizen, natural born citizen, for outstanding things that they do. And then they give one for a naturalized citizen like myself, who became a naturalized citizen, for some of the things that I've been doing in the past. Anyway, the story.
But I think it's so important, because the Daughters of the American Revolution, they go back obviously all the way to our beginning and our foundings.
Yeah.
And for them to recognize you for what you've done. And for those that don't know David's been a part of Roll Call longer than I have, and has come
I didn't know that.
And has contributed parts of his book sales to us, but he also is there to share stories and to listen to the stories of the vets, because there was, even though he was a child, as you said, you might not have been out there with a gun in your hand or dropping bombs from a plane, but you were every bit as involved in the war as anybody else, because you had to live through it. You had to survive it. Your family had to survive it, and your father served. And so for all of those reasons, the things that David has done really led to him being an ideal candidate for that. So we were thrilled to tears that we could, as Roll Call, be a part of seeing that happen for you. So that was really important.
I was really stunned at that. And I gave a speech at the presentation. I gave a speech at the conference. It was a short speech, but it was really effective. I got a standing ovation from over 1,000 women. Who can beat that? I got a. It's a. I got a copy of this speech. Oh, if you have time, I can read this little excerpt of as a child when of what it was really like as a child. I'm going to speak as a Cockney, okay? So you probably won't understand every word that I'm going to say. And so this is a schoolboy's talk as I remember it, but not, I don't remember all the names, but this is more or less what happened. Hello, Bert, what'd you get for lunch today? Well, me mum was going to give me bread and jam today, but she ran out of jam. She gave me the jar to scrape the side with me finger, but there was not enough to put on the bread, so I got dripping again. Yeah, me too. I got some of the brown bits. I did get some of the newspaper to wrap me lunch in before they tore up the paper for the lavatory. Of course, we always saved the pictures of Hitler or Jerry's for the lavatory. Jerry was busy last night, weren't he? He dropped a packet or two over near Golders Green, and I heard that Putney got hammered last night too. I think it nearly got Putney Bridge. Oh, Spud, Nobby Clark told me that Chalky, that he never knew why Jim never came to school last week. Well, it turns out that Chalky's mum found out that Jim's house bought it. And when it got a direct hit on last Tuesday's raid, Jim is gone and so's his mum. His dad was on fire duty that night and he had to pull them out of the rubble. The whole street was a bloody mess. The dad managed to save Jim's little sister, Kathleen. Now it's just Dad and the girl. I hope the ACAC guns got some of the Jerry's, the bastards. Yeah, me too. The guns were making an hell of a row on Clapham Common last night, and I saw the searchlights going all over the sky before me dad told me to get down in the cellar. Did you get any shrapnel for your collection, Spud? I got a couple of sharp pieces, but me dad keeps telling me it's dangerous because if you cut yourself with a piece of incendiary, it could have some phosphorus stuff on it, which could get in your cut and bloody kill you. Well, I'm off to get me tea. See you at school tomorrow if we're lucky. Don't forget your Mickey Mouse gas mask because Mrs. Thompson gets all nasty if you leave it at home. You know you have to practice with it, and I put it on the other night and the cat ran for its life. Ha!
That was fantastic.
Ah,
That was really
A
good.
flashback from the past.
Yeah.
Huh?
wow.
And that actually happened. I mean, not as many as I haven't got the correct names, but that is typical.
Mm.
So many memories, so many stories.
Yeah.
And
And
you've
just
got
one
another-
last thing I want to
Okay.
tell you, if I don't mind,
Sure.
about my late wife, Sophie. The city of McKinney installed a bench in her honor in Bonnie Wenk Park. And there's flowers. We put flowers on it nearly every couple of weeks or so.
How long's she been gone?
Over 4 years now. And
And
the
you were
one thing,
married for
62.
62 years.
Yeah, and that's the bench there. And it says, in memory of Sophie Huntley, 1931 to 2018, who survived the occupation of France in World War II, but found peace in McKinney, Texas. And that's on photo number 21. You got it? Yeah, so when this happened, this bench, I was on Facebook among a lot of other authors, and Marina, she contacted me and she liked my story, and she asked if she could put flowers on that bench. And that's how I met her over the internet. And I said, yeah, sure. But I said, if we put them all there, they'll all die in a day because it's sun. But I put some in the house and some on the bench. And from that point, we began a dialogue and we became very good friends. And anyway,
She's a writer too.
she's an author, and in fact, she just won the Hemingway Award this year for a book she wrote previously, and it's a Hemingway Award for wartime fiction.
Mm.
But all of her books, every one of them, have got awards. She's terrific, and anyway, she is a U.S. citizen, and she was stuck in Moscow, and I helped her get to Texas, and let me put it that way. Mhm.
Well, you've given us some great stories today, and I know we have a ton of questions that we want to have you back again someday to talk some more, and then tell us some more about the other things you were involved in, your businesses, and then
Yeah.
In the upcoming book.
yeah, the upcoming book, and we've got a link here to your book now on here.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
we hope to see the sales go up.
Yeah, we
More.
do. Absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
and really, you know, for anybody that wants to hear history, and that's what we talk about a lot, right? Because that's a big part of roll call. If you want to hear the history, if you want to read it from the people that lived it, this is the opportunity
Yes.
to get to know those stories, because they're not going to be here forever. And a lot of
That's right.
times what you're reading is what somebody else went out and researched or found. And that's great. But sometimes it has a spin on it. Sometimes it doesn't tell the whole story. Sometimes there's things they just can't know because they weren't there.
Right.
So when you get that story from the people that were there, that witnessed it, it carries so much more weight, and you can trust that it is what happened.
And these are stories at the table.
Yes,
You know?
I made a statement in my speech when I received the Americanism Medal. I made a speech, and in that speech, I said that you can read about war, you can see pictures about war, you can watch videos about war, but you cannot know war unless you have actually lived it. Believe me, you cannot know it. You can read it, you can read all you want about it, but you can't know it until you've lived it. And those people in Ukraine today are living it like we lived it. And we should not forget that. And we need to help those people, because this guy, I'm telling you, he will not stop at Ukraine.
No.
He will not. So something has to be done positively. And I'm not sure if that will be done.
Probably not.
I'm not sure.
War is a horrible thing. And then to think about, you know, I until today, I didn't really think so much about all the children that are experiencing the war in Ukraine, like you experienced
Yeah.
the war in
Yeah.
England. But
Yeah.
it's been
Israel, it goes on all the time
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got, on my group, I've got 143 active members that live in Tel Aviv.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about the wives will have to call her friend 2 blocks up, or they're
Mhm.
bombing there today on their way to go to market. It's a way of life.
Yeah, these rockets, but they got the
a lot more sophisticated than those.
but they've got the Iron Dome, and it's working really, really well.
Mhm.
It's really good. That
That's
thing.
true.
Wow.
David, it's been a pleasure having you on Hometown
Well, I
Heroes.
enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm glad
we
that-
look forward to more stories. Look
Thank
forward to.
Mm.
I want to get your book and
Sure.
read it, and
You'll love
look
it,
forward
yeah.
to your next book. We've got roll call coming up.
We do. So
Yeah.
the newsletter, for if we have any current members out there that are listening here this morning, the newsletter will go out this afternoon, and that will have the RSVP instructions. But for anybody that is there and ready to go, you can email us at info@roll-call.org or call the 817-507-5879. And you'll leave a message and leave your name, and we'll get you added on the list. But RSVPs are open. We can take 400 people. I like to leave a little buffer in there because we have a bunch of folks that receive the newsletter by mail. So even though we can go a little over 400, I want to always leave that buffer for our folks that receive it only by mail. So you have to account for that and volunteer. So up to 400. So if you want to get in, within about 10 minutes of the time I send that email out, I will already be well over 100 people RSVP.
Oh, wow.
And thanks to, you know, one thing that was whenever we had the roll call out the NASJRB with Skipper, that started more people coming to roll call. And then certainly whenever Larry helped to start Hometown Heroes, that's really given us a boost. So that's the hottest ticket in town.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our speaker will be Dwayne Williams, who was on the show.
We had on the show here.
Yep, Vietnam vet, and he'll be there. We'll have Carrie there to share a little bit about holidays and heroes, and just continuing to try to help support the community. And I'm sure Rick's going to talk about the bike drive.
Yep.
So we'll get all that, but just really important that we get together, that we visit, that we share those stories, especially if you're a vet out there that is looking for that camaraderie. You want to just sit at a table. You don't have to tell your story, but you just
Soak
sit
it
at a
all
table and visit with other people that have been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and enjoy the lunch. Free for veterans. Doesn't cost anything for anybody to become a part of Roll Call. Go to our website at roll-call.org. Sign up to be a new attendee if you want to come to the luncheons. If you just want to receive the newsletter, you could sign up there for that too. And we'll get rolling. Just get you on board. I think once you, like I always like to tell folks, you just can't get it until you walk in the door to a luncheon.
That's
So
right.
we got to see Larry out there. Come on out.
Larry's got his bike drive going for Christmas. Going to try to get 750 bikes for
Right. And we're hopefully
for
going to be
kids.
able to do it this year at Farrington Field.
Okay.
Nice.
And that bike drive ends, the giveaway is the 17th of December,
Right.
correct?
Right.
And so you need to get busy and find a bicycle and a helmet. And let's see if we can't make 750 plus kids happy this year.
Yes.
The need
That's
is great.
impressive, yeah.
That's right.
Yep, the need is
The
great.
36th year I've done a bike drive.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Tens of thousands. of bikes.
750. There's 750 or more people that are watching Hometown Heroes, just Hometown Heroes. We can certainly each do a bike and a helmet.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, so if
Absolutely.
we all get together and we all contribute a bike and a helmet, we can make that happen and
Yes.
more.
Dave, again, it's a great honor and privilege to have had you on the show, and we really loved your stories.
It was
And
great.
It was
great.
fascinating talking to somebody that was there experiencing the bombing of London.
Well, I'm privileged to have been asked to come. I'm honored. Thank you.
And I'd like to get a shout out to Dusty and Tyler because they're back there in the back working behind the scenes to
Guys
put everything
behind the
together.
scenes.
Yeah,
We
they're
appreciate
critical.
y'all
The
back there.
production crew.
And they're as quiet as church mice. So this is our Hometown Hero Show, and we've enjoyed having you today. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And I'll see you tomorrow at the clay shoot.
Oh, he'll have to remind me because yep. Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's right.
I'm thinking Donna. I got it.
Okay. This is Rick, Mary, Dave, and Larry at Hometown Heroes. Y'all have a good week.
Thank you.
It was great. Now it's photo op time.
Oh, is it?